Let go of that ring, Elena. You will not steal from my family again, not in front of everyone. The winter garden of the Whitmore estate glittered like a showcase built to display power. Beneath the glass dome, chandeliers threw light across champagne flutes, Swiss watches, and gowns designed to be remembered. It was the 30th anniversary of the Whitmore Realty Group, and every guest in that room understood that the evening was not really about business. It was about hierarchy. Elena Marsh, 34 years old, walked in alone. She wore a deep navy gown and a stillness that many mistook for weakness. What no one knew was that she had spent 10 full minutes in her car gathering the courage to walk through that door. From across the ballroom she saw her husband. Alexander Whitmore, 41, was laughing beside a woman named Camille Ortiz. Then, for Elena, the music simply stopped existing. On Camille's right hand sat an emerald ring, deep, oval, luminous, wrapped in a delicate white gold setting. Elena recognized the design before she even saw the full stone. The emerald seemed to breathe under the lights. It was not just any jewel. It could not be mistaken for anything else. The asymmetrical curve of the setting, the two small engraved leaves beside the stone, the slightly tilted inner edge, all of it belonged to the final sketch her mother Claire Marsh had drawn before she died. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. For years, she had kept that sketch inside a leather folder tucked beside letters, photographs, and a faded silk ribbon that still carried the ghost of her mother's perfume. She had used money from her inheritance to buy the stone, and she had brought the design to Gabriel Santos, an old family jeweler, to bring it into the world. No one but Gabriel and Elena knew every detail of that ring, and yet Camille wore it like a trophy. If this story has already caught you, stay with us, because you're about to find out who really stole that jewel, and what secret it was hiding beneath its setting. Elena crossed the room without taking her eyes off Camille's hand. Alex saw her coming. His smile hardened, but he didn't move to greet her. Camille, on the other hand, lifted her champagne glass and turned her wrist slowly, deliberately, as if she knew exactly what kind of light that stone would throw. Elena stopped in front of them and spoke quietly, though the tension in her voice was enough to silence the conversations around her. She asked Camille to remove the ring just for a moment so she could check something engraved inside it. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't insult anyone. She didn't even mention the affair that everyone in that room was pretending not to notice. She simply said she needed to check an inscription. Camille looked at Alex, then at Beatrice Whitmore, Alex's mother, and smiled with a strange mix of fake surprise and quiet satisfaction. Then she raised her hand toward Elena's face and said that a wife who was about to be left behind had no right to touch gifts meant for the next Mrs. Whitmore. A murmur moved through the ballroom. Alex stepped forward and caught Elena's wrist before she could get any closer. His grip was fast and certain, the grip of a man rehearsing a version of events before anyone had the chance to ask a single question. He announced that the ring was a Whitmore family heirloom, passed down from his grandmother and given to Camille with his mother's blessing. Then he accused Elena of trying to make off with several family jewels over the past few months. The lie was so precise that Elena understood in that instant it hadn't been born that night. Someone had prepared it. Beatrice backed the story with icy composure. She said Elena had been struggling with jealous episodes and that the family had kept it quiet out of respect for the marriage. In a matter of seconds, the victim had been repainted as the threat. Elena looked at her mother-in-law and felt something deeper than betrayal. Beatrice had seen that ring before. Years earlier, at a private dinner, Elena had shown it to her and explained that it was inspired by a drawing her mother Claire had made. Maybe Beatrice didn't remember the details. Or maybe she had simply chosen to forget them because forgetting protected her son. Camille used the silence to announce that Alex had promised to use the emerald in their future engagement ceremony. The word future landed on Elena harder than any insult. Alex didn't correct her. He simply ordered the head of security to escort his wife out of the building. 2 security guards approached through the tables. One of them avoided Elena's eyes. The other extended a hand with forced politeness, inviting her to leave. Camille stepped closer to Alex, resting her jeweled hand on his arm, and phones began quietly appearing among the guests. Elena understood that this single night could destroy not only her marriage, but her name. Before she took a single step, a deep voice rang out from the entrance of the Winter Garden. Gabriel Santos asked that no one remove that ring from the room. The old jeweler walked in, carrying a black leather folder and a narrow box sealed with red tape. Without greeting anyone, he announced that the emerald was tied to a private property claim. The room went silent. Beatrice demanded to know who had invited him. Gabriel answered that he hadn't come as a guest. He'd come as the custodian of a piece registered in his workshop. Camille instinctively hid her hand in the folds of her dress. Alex tried to regain control, accusing the jeweler of playing along with some scheme of Elena's. Gabriel didn't argue. He simply set the folder on a table and asked Camille when exactly she'd decided to have the ring resized and why she'd presented an authorization signed by a woman who had never once set foot in his workshop. The question cut through the room like broken glass. Camille went pale. Elena finally understood the missed call and the text message she had received 2 days earlier. Gabriel had tried to warn her. Before she could ask anything else, Alex insisted everyone move past this, quote, private conversation. Gabriel refused and warned that if that ring disappeared from the room, he would call the police. Part 2. 6 months earlier. 6 months before that night, Elena still believed her marriage could be repaired. Alex came home late. He canceled dinners. He spent his weekends on the terrace taking calls he never explained. Elena told herself it was the company. The firm had lost 2 major projects, one in Boston, one in Miami, and the banks were demanding new collateral. 3 years earlier, Elena had used money from her own inheritance to save one of those very projects. Alex had thanked her with tears and promises. But over time, he stopped mentioning it at all, as if the money had simply appeared, as if it were owed to him by nature. Gratitude curdled into habit, and habit curdled into an arrogance Elena recognized far too late. The first real warning sign came on a Tuesday afternoon in January. Elena came home early and found the door to their shared home office standing open. Alex was in front of the filing cabinet, where she kept copies of property deeds, appraisal reports, and documents related to her parents' estate. When he saw her, he closed the drawer too quickly. He said he'd been looking for the deed to their lake house because the bank needed to review the family's assets. Elena reminded him that the lake house belonged to her alone, and it had never been part of any collateral. It seemed like a small moment, but it left a crack. A few days later, Elena noticed that a copy of the emerald certification had gone missing. She said nothing. She wanted to believe Alex had simply taken it by mistake. Still, she began quietly photographing every document and noting the exact position of everything in that office. By then, Camille Ortiz was already working in the company's communications department. She had arrived with glowing recommendations and a rare gift for turning financial trouble into a polished press release. Beatrice adored her. Camille knew how to move through rooms full of politicians, reporters, and investors without ever looking rattled. Alex began inviting her into meetings that used to be reserved for family only. When Elena asked why a staff member had access to confidential information about the company's debts, Alex told her Camille was essential to protecting the firm's reputation. Soon the photographs multiplied. A dinner with investors, a charity gala, a trip to the Hamptons, a tour of a luxury development. Then one night, Elena found a handwritten note in the pocket of Alex's jacket. It read, "When this is all over, the emerald will be mine." No signature. It didn't need one. Elena kept the note and waited. She didn't want to confront a suspicion without proof, because she knew Alex could turn any question she asked into an accusation against her. For weeks, she watched him grow more careful with his phone and more impatient at home. He stopped asking about her work. He criticized the way she dressed. He started suggesting, gently at first, that she simply didn't understand the pressures of running a serious company. At a family dinner, Beatrice suggested that maybe a temporary separation would help Alex, quote, focus. It was framed as advice. It sounded like a decision that had already been made. That same week, Elena noticed Camille wearing small gold earrings with a tiny green stone strikingly similar to a pair that had belonged to Claire. She moved closer to get a better look, but Camille covered them with her hair and left the table, claiming an urgent call. The coincidence stopped feeling like a coincidence. The safe in their bedroom was hidden behind a wood panel. Elena was the only person who knew the full code, or so she believed. Inside, she kept the emerald ring her father's pocket watch, 2 pairs of antique earrings, and a stack of family letters. One morning in March, she opened the safe to store a document and noticed the ring box had shifted just slightly. She opened it. The ring appeared to be there, but something about the light bothered her. The stone reflected too flatly, and the gold felt too light in her hand. Elena wasn't a gemologist, but she'd spent years at her mother's side in workshops and exhibitions. She knew instantly that she was holding a copy. She didn't scream. She didn't confront Alex. She closed the safe, photographed the fake ring, and set it back exactly where she'd found it. Then she called Lucy Farrow, her friend and attorney, and asked to meet somewhere outside the office. Lucy listened without interrupting. When Elena finished, she pulled out a notepad and asked her to list every inherited asset she owned, even the ones that only carried sentimental value. She explained that inside a marriage, the line between shared property and separate property could become a weapon if one spouse acted in bad faith. She also asked who had access to the apartment and the security system. Only Alex the housekeeper and Elena herself. Lucy advised against confronting him yet. First, they needed footage, access logs, bank records. The caution made Elena feel guilty, as if investigating her own husband were itself some kind of betrayal. Lucy was blunt. Trust did not mean closing your eyes, and an innocent man does not swap a real jewel for a fake one just to keep it safe. Elena left that meeting frightened, but for the first time in months, clear-headed. The security log told her something she hadn't expected. The safe had been opened at 2:17 in the morning on a Thursday, while Elena slept under the fog of a migraine medication. The code had been entered correctly on the first try. Alex claimed he'd spent that entire night working in his office, but the hallway cameras had gone dark for 43 minutes. The technician Lucy hired confirmed the outage wasn't accidental. Someone had disabled the module remotely through the app installed on Alex's phone. Maybe he needed a document. Maybe he'd taken the ring to have it appraised as part of some financial maneuver planning to return it. Every possibility required believing a lie, but none of them proved yet that he'd given it to Camille. That proof arrived a week later, in a photo posted from the Hamptons. In the picture, Camille held a glass of wine by the water. The framing looked casual, but her hand sat dead center. She wore Claire's emerald, smiling at someone just outside the frame. In the reflection of the glass, you could just make out the silhouette of a man. Alex. Elena stared at that photograph for a long time, zooming in until the pixels blurred. She didn't feel rage, not at first, just a strange, hollow emptiness. Alex hadn't only betrayed her. He had taken the most intimate symbol of her bond with her mother and handed it over to fuel someone else's love story. That night, when he came home, Elena asked if he'd been in the Hamptons. Alex said no, that he'd spent the day in meetings upstate. Then he kissed her casually and asked her to sign an authorization to review some of the family's assets. Elena set the pen down and said she'd rather read it carefully first. From that point on, the house became a stage of calculated silences. Alex pretended everything was normal, but he watched her every move. She pretended not to know while quietly copying files and checking inventories. She discovered her father's watch was missing. 2 small paintings had been replaced with near-perfect reproductions. She found deleted emails where Alex asked an intermediary about the value of several pieces. One phrase repeated itself again and again in his messages. "These are recoverable assets. I can buy them back later." To him, Elena's memories were nothing more than a temporary reserve of cash. Part 3. The Warning. Lucy began building a legal strategy, but they still needed to prove where the missing assets had gone and who had received them. Then the invitation to the anniversary gala arrived. Beatrice called Elena personally and informed her that her attendance was mandatory to avoid, in her words, rumors. The warning itself confirmed that something was about to happen. 2 days before the gala, Elena received a call from an unknown number. When she answered, no one spoke for several seconds. Then she heard Gabriel Santos's voice, broken up by the noise of his workshop. He asked if she'd authorized any changes to Claire's light. Elena could barely manage a no. The call cut off. Moments later, a text arrived. "Check your safe. Don't sign anything. I'll be in touch." Elena tried calling back, but the number was dead. That was when she opened the ring box again and studied the copy under a magnifying glass. No initials inside, no date, none of the tiny hidden mechanism Gabriel had built into the original. The forgery was good enough to fool someone distracted, not good enough to fool someone who knew the piece's history. Elena closed the box and understood she could no longer wait for a confession. She had to let Alex believe she still knew nothing at all. On the night of the gala, before walking into the mansion, Elena found her mother's old silk ribbon tucked inside her purse. She'd been carrying it since that morning, though she didn't remember packing it. She held it between her fingers and thought of her mother's voice, which always used to say that a jewel could change hands, but never change its story. Then she walked through the door toward the winter garden, toward Gabriel, Alex, Camille, and the entire Whitmore family. She knew that story was about to speak for itself. Before Gabriel could open his folder, Lucy appeared at the entrance, holding a court notification. Alex recognized her and finally let go of Elena's wrist. Gabriel looked at the ring, then at Camille, and said a sentence that made the entire room go still. "If this setting has been tampered with, we won't just learn who this stone belongs to. We'll learn who tried to erase her name from it." In the middle of the chaos, Elena understood the emerald was only the first door. If Alex had gone as far as altering a registered piece, he may also have forged documents, sold off other memories, and used her own inheritance to fund a second hidden life. Camille pressed her hand to her chest, guarding the ring, while Beatrice demanded the band start playing again. No one obeyed. The guests no longer looked at Elena like a jealous wife. They looked at her like the only person in the room who understood that this night could bring down an entire dynasty. Lucy leaned toward her friend and whispered not to say another word until they'd reviewed the paperwork. Elena nodded. For the first time since she'd seen that ring on Camille's hand, she felt like she could finally breathe. Not because she'd gotten the ring back, because Alex's lie had just earned itself witnesses. And a lie with witnesses could finally become evidence. Part 4. After the Gala. Elena left the mansion just after midnight, not because the Whitmores had managed to push her out, but because Lucy advised leaving before Alex found a way to take back control of the story. Gabriel handed over a sealed copy of the file, but refused to open the ring's hidden mechanism without a notary present along with a representative from the insurance company. The party carried on, at least on the surface. The band played another 15 minutes while guests huddled in small groups, and board members avoided making eye contact with Alex. Camille was kept in a powder room under quiet watch to make sure she didn't leave with the ring still on her hand. Elena climbed into Lucy's car, feeling something strange for the first time in months. She no longer wondered if she'd imagined the betrayal. The lie was no longer a private suspicion. It had become a fact witnessed by dozens of people. On the drive back into the city, Lucy explained that the scene at the gala could work in their favor, but it had also given Alex time to build a defense. He could claim he'd taken the ring by mistake, believing it was shared property. He could claim Camille received it without knowing where it came from. The forged workshop authorization was far more serious, though. They still had to prove who had ordered it. Elena stared out the window, watching the streetlights smear across the glass, and asked her friend how long Alex had been planning this. Lucy didn't answer right away. Then she said the thing Elena hadn't wanted to admit to herself. Swapping a real emerald for a fake one, disabling cameras, collecting property certificates, none of that happens on impulse. It takes planning, access, and a dangerous kind of confidence that you'll never get caught. Elena held her mother's silk ribbon inside her purse and decided that at first light they'd go through every single object left of her inheritance. She didn't go back to the apartment she shared with Alex. Lucy took her to a small place near downtown that she used as a backup office and had the locks changed before they even walked in. Elena barely slept. At 6 in the morning, she started a list. Claire's ring, her father's pocket watch, 2 paintings signed by a New England artist, a set of earrings, a box of letters, 3 notarized documents, the deed to the family's lake house. The list kept growing until it included things with no resale value at all, because now she understood Alex didn't draw a line between memory and merchandise. By 7:15, she had 16 missed calls from her husband. She didn't answer. His last message said the family was willing to forget her behavior if she came to Beatrice's office before noon. Elena read that sentence twice. No apology, no concern, no explanation about the ring, just an offer to erase the humiliation they themselves had staged. Part 5. The Meeting. At mid-morning, Beatrice called a private meeting at company headquarters. Camille arrived in dark sunglasses, the ring sealed inside a clear evidence box that Gabriel had closed in front of witnesses. She was furious, not frightened. She demanded to know why Alex had told her the ring belonged to his grandmother, and why no one had warned her that Elena might come after it. Alex avoided the question and told her they needed to keep their story straight. According to that story, Camille had received the ring as an engagement gift, had no idea of its true origin, and had never forged any signature. The workshop form, he claimed, had been filled out by a confused employee. Camille realized he was trying to paint her as naive. She also realized he might abandon her the moment things got worse. For the first time since the relationship began, she saw Alex not as a powerful man, but as someone who used everyone around him for as long as they remained useful. Beatrice, for her part, refused to accept that her son could be guilty of anything. She insisted the real danger was Elena, who understood the company's fragile finances and might use the scandal to seize control. She ordered her communications director, Stephen, to draft a statement about an, quote, emotional crisis suffered by the CEO's wife during a family event. Camille would appear as the victim of an outburst and Alex as the husband who'd simply tried to protect everyone. Stephen pointed out that the security footage showed Elena speaking calmly and that no guest had seen her physically try to take the ring. Beatrice replied that the public truth had nothing to do with what actually happened. It depended entirely on who told a coherent story first. Her plan included leaking old photos of Elena during exhausted, sleepless moments, along with private medical records about her insomnia and personal messages pulled out of context. Alex agreed in silence. Camille agreed too, though she was beginning to understand that the same machine could just as easily turn against her. At that same hour, Lucy secured authorization to review access logs at the apartment and requested a preliminary bank report on the accounts tied to Elena's inheritance. She discovered several recent appraisals had been paid for using a company card belonging to Whitmore Realty. The line items mentioned a gold watch, 2 oil paintings, and a residential property outside the city. The pattern was clear. Alex hadn't just been removing objects from Elena's life. He'd been using company resources to have them appraised before deciding what to do with them. Lucy asked whether Elena had ever signed a general power of attorney for her husband. Elena remembered a stack of documents from 3 years earlier during the crisis with the Boston project. Alex had asked her to sign quickly so the banks would accept it as collateral. She had a copy, but she wasn't certain she'd received every page. That doubt landed between them like a threat. If someone had added new authority after the signature, the lake house could be in danger too. Part 6. The House. Elena insisted on visiting her family's old lake house that same afternoon. It sat about an hour outside the city, ringed by birch trees and a low stone wall. The house had stayed closed since Claire's death, except for monthly visits from a caretaker. When Elena arrived, the front door was untouched, but her mother's old study showed signs of having been searched. The drawers were arranged with unnatural precision, and a leather folder had been moved to a different shelf. Inside, several of Claire's original sketches were missing, including the full design for Claire's light. The caretaker remembered Alex visiting 2 weeks earlier with a man he introduced as an appraiser. He'd said Elena wanted the house prepared for a possible sale. Elena felt the floor tilt beneath her. Alex wasn't just scrambling to cover an urgent debt. He was dismantling piece by piece the only inheritance she had left of her parents. In a dresser behind a family photograph, Elena found an envelope Alex had never noticed. Inside was a letter written by Claire months before she died, addressed to Gabriel Santos. In it, Claire described the meaning of the ring and asked that if it was ever made, it stay tied to Elena's name always. She had added one simple line: "Don't let anyone turn her memory into currency." Elena read those words, sitting on the floor of the study. For months she had tried to understand the affair as a kind of romantic loss. That letter revealed something else entirely. Alex hadn't just wandered into someone else's arms. He had walked into the most vulnerable part of Elena's life and deliberately chosen the objects that belonged to people who could no longer defend themselves. Lucy photographed the letter and called Gabriel. The jeweler confirmed he had a notarized copy of that same letter filed with the original manufacturing records. That evidence reinforced Claire's clear stated intent and undercut any argument that the ring was shared marital property. Gabriel agreed to meet them that evening after hours in his closed workshop. The place still smelled of metalwood and wax, just as it had when Elena visited as a little girl with her mother. On the table, he laid out the resizing request Camille had filed. The signature looked like Elena's at first glance, but it carried a slant she never used. Gabriel explained he'd suspected something from the start because the woman who came in avoided showing identification and claimed the ring needed to be resized urgently before a party. When he refused, Camille had called Alex right in front of his assistant. The assistant heard her say, "Your wife doesn't get to decide what's already mine." Alex had then asked to speak with Gabriel directly, insisting Elena was too unwell to handle it herself. Gabriel recorded every call related to insured pieces. That conversation existed, and in it, Alex acknowledged the ring was registered under Elena's name. The revelation landed heavy in the room. Lucy asked to hear the full recording immediately, but Gabriel explained his attorney needed to formally authorize its release to protect the chain of custody. Still, he played a few seconds, just enough for Elena to hear her husband's voice. Alex was saying the marriage situation was complicated, that he'd soon have full authority over the assets, and that Gabriel needed to keep things quiet for the family's sake. Elena closed her eyes. There was no confusion left to explain away. Alex knew exactly who owned that ring, and he was already trying to get ahead of a divorce he'd never had the courage to actually bring up. Gabriel added something even more unsettling. Near the end of the call, Alex had asked if it was possible to remove the interior inscription without damaging the stone. Gabriel told him any alteration would leave a permanent record and refused. That single question proved Alex intended to erase the piece's identity before selling it or transferring it for good. Part 7. What Camille Learned. Camille went home and started going through every gift she'd received over the past year. She laid them out on the bed. The green earrings, an antique bracelet, a silver brooch, 2 small boxes she'd never even opened. Alex had always presented these as family heirlooms or pieces bought at private auction. Now every single object felt like a threat. She remembered a night months earlier when Elena had noticed the earrings during a family dinner. Camille had read that look as envy and mocked her for it privately afterward. The possibility that she'd been wearing another woman's stolen belongings hadn't sparked guilt yet, but it had sparked fear. She photographed each piece and sent the images to a friend who worked in antiques. The answer came back fast. One of the brooches appeared in a catalog of the Marsh family collection, published 15 years earlier. Camille understood then that Alex hadn't handed her one stolen piece of jewelry. He'd dressed her in his wife's entire history. Her first instinct was to call Alex and demand he come over. He answered impatiently and told her to hide everything until the lawyers could put together an explanation. Camille asked if the earrings belonged to Elena too. There was a pause that lasted too long. Alex said some of the pieces had, quote, become part of the marital estate, though he couldn't say exactly which ones. Then he told her to delete photos, conversations, receipts. Camille felt a chill she didn't recognize. She had admired his confidence because it made her feel chosen. Now that same coldness revealed exactly how much he was willing to sacrifice to protect himself. She packed the gifts into a box and copied his messages onto an external drive. She didn't do it for justice. She did it to survive. If Alex tried to pin this all on her, she would need proof that he'd presented every single object as his own to give. Before hanging up, she asked if he really planned to go through with the divorce. Alex told her this wasn't the time for sentimentality. For the first time, Camille understood she had probably never been a future wife. Just a convenient, replaceable ally. The next day, the Whitmore board convened an emergency session to assess the reputational damage from the gala. Beatrice expected a controlled conversation, but 3 board members had anonymously received photographs of Camille wearing pieces from the Marsh family collection. No one knew the antiques friend was the one who'd sent them after recognizing the pieces herself. The directors asked whether the company had paid for appraisals of personal property, and whether those items had been used as undisclosed collateral. Alex denied any wrongdoing. He claimed Elena was trying to punish the company for the failure of their marriage. Then, one director produced an invoice from an auction house. The description partially matched Elena's father's watch. Beatrice cut the meeting short and demanded a limited internal audit, confident she could still control the outcome. But doubt had already entered the room, and Alex's authority no longer felt untouchable. Part 8. The Forged Power of Attorney. Lucy requested a certified copy of the original power of attorney from the notary who had handled it. The authentic document granted limited authority tied to one specific project and expired 12 months later. But in the company's own files, a different version turned up with 2 additional pages, authorizing Alex to negotiate certain personal assets. The page numbering didn't match, and the signature on the final page looked scanned. This was no longer just about jewelry pulled from a safe. Someone had manufactured a legal instrument to fake real authority. Lucy explained they needed to find out who created the file when it was used, and whether it had already been presented to a bank. Elena remembered the so-called appraiser who'd visited the lake house and felt a new sense of urgency. They called the county property records office. A lending institution had recently requested a detailed report on the lake house, though no mortgage had been filed yet. That was both an opportunity and a deadline. If Alex managed to finalize the loan before they could act, recovering the house would mean a long, ugly legal fight. Lucy filed an emergency motion to block any transfer or lien on the property. Elena, meanwhile, decided to return to the apartment with an appraiser and a notary. Every room revealed a carefully hidden absence. The reproduction paintings sat in the original frames. Her father's watch had been swapped for a similar-looking model. Several private letters had been moved. In the office, they found shredded paper and a shipping label from an art transport company. The notary documented everything. When Elena opened the bottom drawer of Alex's desk, she found a gray folder with one word written on it by hand: recoverable. Inside were photographs of her belongings, estimated values, the names of intermediaries, and dates. Some items were marked delivered, others still available. The last page in the folder showed the lake house, photographed from the garden. Beside the image was a dollar figure, the name of a private lender, and a date set for closing: 9 days away. Below that, a note in Alex's handwriting said Elena's authorization was already handled. She didn't cry. Sitting at the desk where her husband had planned to sell off her past, she felt the pain settle into something else: resolve. She handed the folder to the notary-requested certified copies and called Lucy. Her friend confirmed the evidence tied the forged power of attorney directly to a specific transaction, which would let them seek protective orders on the rest of the assets. Before leaving, Elena noticed an old wedding photo still sitting on a shelf. Alex stood behind her, hands on her shoulders, smiling. For years she had read that gesture as protection. Now it looked like the posture of a man convinced that everything he touched already belonged to him. That night, Alex came home to find the drawer empty, notary seals on the safe, and a notice taped to the office door. He called Elena more than 20 times. Then came the messages, alternating between threats and pleading. First, he accused her of trying to destroy the company. Then he claimed everything he'd done was to protect their future. Finally, he promised to return every single item if she would just drop Lucy from the case. Elena didn't respond, not from the small apartment where she was staying. She sat holding Claire's letter while the voicemails played out unopened beside her. Next to her, Lucy organized the evidence, while Gabriel prepared to formally release the full recording. The investigation had barely started, but the shape of the lie was already visible. Alex had used love marriage and trust as keys into a fortune that was never his to take. What he still didn't know was that Camille was quietly gathering her own evidence too, and that his greatest weakness wouldn't turn out to be the ring. It would be the sheer number of people he'd lied to, and how differently each of them remembered it. Part 9. Claire's Light. The complete file on Claire's Light arrived at Lucy's office inside a sealed metal case, delivered personally by Gabriel Santos and his attorney. Elena watched as they removed each document with gloved hands. The certificate for the emerald purchased at a Bogota auction, the transfer from Elena's inheritance account, Claire's original sketches, and the manufacturing contract signed 9 years earlier. Not one reference to Alex or to the Whitmore name appeared anywhere in the file. On the final page was an unusual clause added at Gabriel's own request. The piece could never be sold, altered, divided, or used as collateral without Elena's written and in-person authorization. Gabriel explained he'd included that condition because Claire had always considered the design a personal work of art, not a commercial object. Lucy rested her hand on the file and said they could now prove ownership. What they still needed was intent. Elena understood that recovering the ring itself would end up being the easy part, compared to proving just how many separate decisions Alex had made to take it from her. Gabriel then opened a small wooden box that had stayed closed during their first meeting. Inside was a wax reproduction of the setting and a tiny mechanism shaped like a crescent moon. He explained that the ring had a hidden, articulated base, invisible to anyone who didn't already know the design. Press 2 specific points beneath the engraved leaves and the structure would open, revealing a protected inscription underneath. Claire had asked for her own initials to appear there, C.M., next to the exact day Elena was born. That date appeared in no public record, no certificate anywhere. It was a private signal that mother and daughter had shared for years in letters, drawings, and gifts. Gabriel added that if anyone tried to file down the inscription, the mechanism would jam permanently, and an internal mark would prove the piece had been tampered with. That was exactly why Alex had asked whether it could be erased without damaging the stone. He hadn't just wanted to resize it. He'd wanted to sever the link between the jewel and the woman it belonged to. Lucy played the full workshop recording. Camille's voice sounded impatient, insisting Elena had given her permission to have the ring resized. Then came Alex, quieter, more careful, explaining that his wife was going through an emotional crisis and couldn't handle her own affairs right now. Gabriel asked if he had a valid power of attorney. Alex said everything would be formalized soon and that the family needed discretion. At the end, after a pause, Alex asked the real question. Could the interior inscription be removed before the piece went to auction? Elena felt pressure building in her chest, listening to how casually her husband discussed erasing her mother's memory. No hesitation in his voice, no guilt, just calculation. Gabriel had told him any such alteration would be illegal without the owner present. Alex hung up without saying goodbye. Lucy stopped the recording and said this changed everything. What had looked like marital confusion now looked like a deliberate plan to seize and conceal property. The next piece of evidence came from a personal email account Alex used for private matters. A forensic technician authorized by the court recovered deleted messages with an auction house in Geneva. In them, Alex described an antique emerald without naming the owner and asked how much its value would increase if, quote, sentimental markings with no historical relevance were removed. The auction contact replied that the piece could fetch a very high price if it came with a clean, documented family provenance. Alex suggested attributing it to a private Whitmore collection and offered photographs of Beatrice wearing other greenstones as visual support. Lucy read the messages aloud while Elena sat perfectly still. The lie hadn't only been built to seduce Camille. It had also been part of a plan to fabricate an entirely false provenance. If that ring disappeared into an international sale, getting it back would be nearly impossible. Elena remembered how easily Alex had accused his own wife of trying to steal it. Now she understood why. He needed her branded as the suspect publicly before she had the chance to claim it herself. Part 10. The Audit. The internal audit at Whitmore Realty revealed a financial problem far worse than Beatrice had admitted. 2 luxury projects had blown through their budgets. Several pre-sales had been canceled. A company tied to Alex owed millions to an investment fund. To hide the shortfall from the board, Alex had quietly used deposits from other projects and undisclosed personal guarantees. The money Elena had put in 3 years earlier hadn't just rescued one development, it had kept an essential line of credit open for the entire firm. Without that guarantee, the bank could reopen every term of the debt overnight. Alex knew a divorce would put that backing at risk, which meant he needed 2 things: control over Elena's private assets and a way to discredit her before she demanded transparency. The affair and the fraud were never separate roads. Camille gave him new contacts, a fresh public image, someone willing to repeat his version of events. Elena, meanwhile, represented the capital, holding up a structure that could no longer stand on its own. Beatrice received the preliminary report in her office and destroyed the first copy. She accused the auditor of exaggerating, insisting every major company shifted assets between entities during hard times. But when she saw the exact figure Elena had guaranteed her, expression changed. She had never known that the daughter-in-law she considered so dependent was the one person who had kept the company from collapsing. Alex had told her the money came from a deal with foreign investors that he had negotiated personally. Beatrice realized her son had lied to her too. But her first concern wasn't Elena, it was the Whitmore name. She called in 2 attorneys and asked whether they could invalidate Elena's contribution by claiming emotional incapacity at the time of signing. One of the attorneys said there was no medical evaluation to support that. Beatrice suggested they get one. The room went quiet. She had just crossed a line that could no longer be dressed up as protecting the family. While the Whitmores plotted their next move, Elena and Lucy went through the folder marked recoverable. Every object was tied to a person, a debt, or a favor. Her father's watch had gone to a private lender as collateral on an urgent loan. The 2 paintings sat in the home of a businessman who'd approved a contract extension. Claire's earrings were logged next to Camille's name and the word loyalty. An antique bracelet had been used to convince a journalist to kill a story about the company's losses. The list revealed a system. Alex had turned his wife's memories into currency, paying for silence time and loyalty, one object at a time. Elena couldn't decide what hurt more, imagining those pieces in strangers' hands or realizing every single handoff had been calculated in advance. Lucy pointed out that several recipients might claim they had no idea the items were stolen, but their testimony would still help prove who had distributed everything. Elena agreed to reach out, knowing each conversation would reopen a wound. Part 11. Retrieval. The lender holding the watch agreed to meet that same afternoon. His name was Jack Lawrence, and he ran a quiet office behind an art gallery downtown. When Elena showed him a photograph of her father wearing the watch, the confident businessman act dropped away. He explained that Alex had handed it over, claiming it was a piece inherited from his own grandfather, promising to reclaim it within 30 days. That deadline had already passed twice. Jack showed them a contract signed only by Alex and let Lucy photograph the engraving on the back, her father's initials, and the date of his parents' wedding. He admitted he'd suspected something wasn't right, but hadn't asked because the Whitmore name felt like guarantee enough on its own. Elena asked for the watch back immediately, without waiting for a trial. Jack asked to be paid the loan amount first. She refused to buy back a second time something that had never actually been hers to sell. Lucy set a copy of the police report on the table. Reading it, Jack understood that holding on to the watch could pull him into a criminal investigation. The paintings were harder to track down. The businessman who had them, Mark Carden, denied owning them at first. He only changed his story when Lucy mentioned the shipping company's records. He'd received them at a home outside the city and admitted Alex had offered them as a, quote, thank you gift after his company delayed a major claim worth millions. Mark insisted he had never met Elena and believed the paintings belonged to the company. When she walked into his living room and saw one of them hanging above the fireplace, she recognized a small hairline crack she'd once helped restore, standing beside her mother. She couldn't hold back her tears. Mark watched her reaction and understood instantly that no corporate explanation could justify that scene. He promised to return both paintings and testify as long as his name stayed out of the press. Elena agreed not to expose him publicly, but refused to hide her own testimony. She had learned that secrets used to protect reputations usually ended up protecting abuse instead. Camille, meanwhile, had quietly begun negotiating with Lucy behind Alex's back. She sent an email from a new account offering photographs, messages, and recordings in exchange for legal protection. She wasn't willing to admit involvement in the forgery, but she was ready to prove Alex had handed her the jewelry and built an entire false story about his marriage. Lucy told her she couldn't promise immunity, though early cooperation would count in her favor. Camille asked to meet with Elena alone. Elena hesitated. She didn't trust her, and she still remembered the way Camille had held that emerald up to her own face during the gala. Still, she agreed because she needed to hear the version of events Alex had used to explain away every single gift. Part 12. Camille's Confession. They met at a closed cafe. Camille arrived without makeup, a velvet box tucked in her purse. She set it on the table and returned Claire's earrings. Elena didn't touch them. She asked first how long Camille had known they belonged to another woman. Camille claimed she hadn't known until after the gala, though. She admitted she'd noticed Elena's discomfort during that one family dinner. She said Alex had described his wife as obsessive, someone who took Whitmore family objects and later pretended she'd inherited them. According to him, Elena had used family money to buy the emerald and register it under her own name through some kind of influence. Camille wanted to believe it because it let her feel like the chosen woman, the one who'd rescued a man trapped in an unfair marriage. She admitted she'd enjoyed humiliating Elena and that she'd worn the ring to the gala knowing exactly what kind of reaction it would provoke. She didn't apologize right away. She said she'd been deceived too. Elena looked at her with a calm, quiet coldness and said being deceived explained why she'd accepted the ring. It didn't explain why she chose to use it to hurt someone else. Camille looked down. For the first time, she understood that cooperating with the investigation wouldn't erase her own choices. She handed over an external drive full of voice messages. In one, Alex promised that after the divorce, the lake house would be renovated as a home for the two of them. In another, he assured her Elena would sign anything because she wouldn't survive a public scandal about her mental health. Camille also had a recording of Alex coaching her on exactly how to describe the ring in front of guests. Call it the Whitmore grandmother's emerald, he told her. Say Beatrice approved the gift. That recording proved the entire scene at the gala had been staged in advance. Camille was meant to provoke Elena. Alex was meant to step in. Beatrice was meant to reinforce the story of a jealous wife having a breakdown. If Elena reacted with any kind of desperation, they'd have the footage to build their PR campaign around. The one thing they hadn't planned for was Gabriel walking through that door. Lucy listened to the recording twice and said they could now connect the public defamation directly to the attempted seizure of the ring. Elena felt sick, understanding that her own pain had been engineered as a strategic tool. Part 13. The Whistleblower. That same night, Stephen called Elena in secret. The communications director had been ordered to leak information about her mental health, and he understood the damage that could do. He confessed that Beatrice wanted a retroactive psychiatric report from a doctor close to the family. The document would claim Elena suffered from confusion, possessive behavior, and difficulty distinguishing her own property from shared property. The plan was to use it in the divorce and in front of the board. Stephen wasn't going to take part, but he was afraid of being fired if he refused too openly. Lucy asked him to preserve every email message and instruction he'd received in writing. She also warned him that fabricating a medical report could constitute several separate crimes. Stephen agreed to hand over evidence, though he asked for legal protection in return. Elena listened in silence. Beatrice wasn't defending her son out of blind instinct anymore. She was willing to invent an illness to make her son's wife look incapable. The humiliation at the gala had only been the opening move of a much bigger campaign. Lucy decided to move quickly. She filed the ring's full case file, the workshop recording, the recoverable folder, the altered power of attorney, and the messages Camille had provided. She requested a freeze on several accounts, a block on any transaction involving the lake house, and a court-ordered deposit of every recovered piece of jewelry. The judge granted part of the request provisionally and ordered every piece of electronic company data preserved. When technicians arrived at company headquarters, Alex realized someone close to him was cooperating with Elena. He suspected Camille and showed up at her apartment unannounced. He found the jewelry boxes empty and her computer still on. He accused her of betraying him. Camille told him he'd been the first one to turn her into something replaceable. Alex tried to grab his phone back, but she stepped away and threatened to call the police. The relationship that had started as a promise of power ended in a scene of fear and accusations. Walking out of the building, Alex called Beatrice and said they needed to act before Elena formally withdrew her bank guarantee. He proposed offering her an unusually generous divorce settlement, as long as she agreed not to press charges and confirmed the jewelry had been consensual gifts. Beatrice agreed to prepare the offer, convinced everyone had a price. It included a downtown apartment, a large cash payment, and a non-disclosure clause. The next morning, 2 attorneys showed up at Lucy's office. Elena read the full document and stopped at one line. It stated that Alex had managed her assets with verbal authorization from his wife. Signing it would turn every theft into a loan and every lie into a misunderstanding. The attorneys insisted it was the only way to avoid years of public exposure. Elena closed the folder and said she had no interest in buying silence with the very objects that had been taken from her. Then she asked them to leave. Part 14. Escalation. The refusal triggered an immediate response. Beatrice ordered a statement published implying Elena was trying to destabilize the company during a difficult separation. Before it could go out, Stephen sent a copy to Lucy along with the emails ordering him to manipulate Elena's medical information. Lucy requested an emergency order blocking any use of Elena's personal data. The statement was stopped, but the war was already public. Alex gathered several loyal board members and assured them Elena was withdrawing her guarantee out of spite. One of them asked why a supposedly dependent wife's personal fortune was propping up a critical piece of the company. Another wanted to know why company funds had paid for appraisals of her personal belongings. Alex lost his temper and accused the board of disloyalty. His reaction confirmed exactly what many of them had started to suspect. The CEO no longer drew any real line between the company, his family, and his wife's property. To him, it was all the same territory. The final discovery came from files recovered off the home computer Alex used. Among the deleted documents was a spreadsheet listing dates, values, and recipients. The last column noted the purpose of each transaction. Cover interest payments. Influence a journalist. Reward Camille. Guarantee a loan. Fund a private account overseas. At the bottom of the file, the emerald was marked for an international sale scheduled for just 3 weeks after the gala. Below that, the lake house was listed as the primary collateral for a new line of credit. Elena understood that even if Camille had worn the ring that night, Alex had planned to take it back afterward and sell it. Not even his own girlfriend was the real endpoint. Everyone had simply been a tool holding up a financial structure that was already doomed. Lucy printed the spreadsheet and said it proved not just theft, but a fully organized plan. Before closing the file, Gabriel asked to show them one more thing. He brought Elena into the workshop and switched on a lamp over the original wax mold of the ring. Along one edge sat a line Claire had written that had never made it into any contract because it read like a private note, not a formal design element. So my daughter remembers that nothing beautiful ever needs to humiliate another woman to shine. Elena ran her finger over the reproduction of that line and thought of Camille lifting her hand to her own face at the gala. The sentence felt like it had traveled through time just to describe that exact night. Gabriel promised the ring would come back to her intact. Elena told him she wasn't only fighting for the ring anymore. She wanted to stop Alex from turning the truth itself into another asset he could sell, alter, or bury. As she left the workshop, Lucy took a call from the court. The search warrant on the company's files had been expanded. The next morning, investigators would open Alex's private safe deposit box. According to the spreadsheet that where the final piece of evidence, the one that could bring his entire story down, was waiting. Part 15. The Safe Deposit Box. Alex's private safe deposit box sat in a quiet downtown branch registered under a shell company with no real operations. When the court officer inserted the master key and slid open the metal drawer, Elena felt like she was about to see a physical version of every silence in her marriage. Inside were numbered envelopes, original certificates, shipping receipts, and photographs of Claire's jewelry laid out on black fabric. They also found her father's watch wrapped in tissue paper, despite the fact that Jack Lawrence had shown them a contract claiming he still held it as collateral. That meant Alex had either used a replica to secure the loan or had quietly recovered the original without ever paying off the debt. Under the watch sat a rubber stamp engraved with a raised reproduction of Elena's signature. Lucy held it up in front of the witnesses and understood immediately that they weren't just looking at a handful of altered documents anymore. They were looking at a tool built specifically to manufacture Elena's authorization whenever Alex needed it. In another envelope was the resizing form filed at Gabriel's workshop, along with several practice attempts at Elena's signature traced on transparent paper. The handwriting matched Camille's, but the margin notes were written in Alex's hand instructions on where to stretch the final letter, how to avoid too obvious a slant. Elena studied those instructions with a calm that surprised even Lucy. For months, she had believed her husband saw her as irrelevant. The sheer amount of time he'd spent learning to imitate her proved the opposite. He needed her identity because his empire couldn't survive without it. At the bottom of the box sat an encrypted drive the technicians couldn't open right away. The officer took it into evidence along with everything else. Before leaving the branch, Elena asked to see the watch one more time. She recognized a small scratch near the crown, left the day her father accidentally dropped it on a family trip. It wasn't a replica. Alex had hidden the real one while a different watch circulated as collateral. The existence of two watches raised a bigger question. If Alex had faked objects to hand over to lenders, he might have deceived business partners and creditors with collateral that didn't exist at all. The audit expanded and uncovered that several pieces attributed to the Whitmore family collection had never belonged to the family in the first place. Some were reproductions commissioned from workshops overseas. Others were manipulated photographs of Elena's own belongings. Alex had built an entire fictional fortune around a prestigious last name, betting that no one would ever ask him to prove it. When the bank received the preliminary report, it suspended the new line of credit and demanded a review of every prior guarantee. The news reached the board before Beatrice could contain it. 2 directors resigned. One demanded Alex be removed immediately. Another called for an emergency shareholder meeting with major creditors present. For the first time, this wasn't a problem that could be handled with a quiet, private conversation. The same institution that had spent years protecting his reputation was now preparing to judge him by documents he no longer controlled. Part 16. The Press. Alex struck back by accusing Elena of orchestrating a conspiracy to seize the company. He called in friendly reporters and told them his wife had manipulated Gabriel, pressured Camille, and forged the entire recoverable folder herself. He presented the stamp found in the safe deposit box as a tool that, according to him, Elena used to authorize transactions when she didn't feel like being physically present. The explanation sounded absurd, but a few outlets ran it anyway because the Whitmore name still opened doors. Elena woke up the next day to her photo splashed across several websites next to phrases like marital war and fight over a family jewel. Not a single headline mentioned the notarized documents or the workshop recording. Lucy advised her to stay quiet until the formal hearing. Elena agreed, though she knew every hour of silence gave the lie more room to grow. Leaving her building, she found cameras waiting for a reaction. She didn't answer a single question. She walked to her car with her head up, while a reporter shouted, asking if she was trying to destroy the man who had, quote, financed her life. The public accusations hurt more than Elena expected. Old acquaintances stopped returning her calls. Several clients canceled meetings. A design magazine pulled an interview that had been scheduled for months. Even people who knew her history chose silence rather than risk crossing the Whitmore name. Elena finally understood why Alex had staged the humiliation at the gala. He didn't need to convince everyone she was guilty. He only needed enough doubt to make people quietly step away. That afternoon, she got a call from the doctor who had treated her insomnia. He warned her that someone had requested her full medical records using a document supposedly signed by her. The clinic had blocked the request, but it had come attached to the name of one of Beatrice's attorneys. Lucy added the incident to the formal complaint and requested protective orders around her medical data. Elena felt cornered. Her husband hadn't just taken her belongings. He was trying to take ownership of who she was, how she thought, and whether anyone should believe her at all. Beatrice showed up at the small apartment unannounced. She came alone, dressed in black, and asked to speak with Elena without any attorneys present. Lucy refused to leave the room, though she stood back at a distance. The matriarch offered no apology. She laid out a new proposal on the table. Immediate return of every recovered piece of jewelry, a large financial settlement, public recognition of Elena as a benefactor of the company, all in exchange for dropping the criminal charges and keeping her bank guarantee in place for 2 more years. Beatrice insisted hundreds of families depended on that decision. Elena read the offer and asked why Alex's name appeared in none of the release clauses. The answer told her everything. Beatrice was willing to sacrifice money, prestige, and part of her control. She was not willing to publicly admit her son had stolen from his own wife. Elena closed the folder and said she couldn't save a company by forcing herself to confirm a lie. She also reminded Beatrice that the employees wouldn't lose their jobs if the board simply accepted independent oversight. Beatrice realized in that moment that she was no longer negotiating with the quiet daughter-in-law of years past. Before she left, Beatrice let slip a truth she'd been sitting on for months. Alex had started using Elena's assets after an investment fund threatened to seize collateral across several of the company's entities. Beatrice had discovered part of the plan, but chose to look away because Alex promised he'd buy everything back. She believed it would all be temporary and that Elena would never find out. When Camille appeared, Beatrice saw a useful ally for rebuilding the company's image and attracting new investors. She hadn't approved of the relationship out of affection, only utility. Elena listened without interrupting. The confession didn't absolve Beatrice. It proved she had chosen to protect the family name, even knowing the price was another woman's private life. Lucy asked if she'd be willing to repeat those words in front of a judge. Beatrice snapped back into her usual cold composure and said she had never authorized any crimes. Still walking out, she looked like a woman just beginning to understand that family power could become its own kind of prison. Part 17. The Hidden Camera. The encrypted drive from the safe deposit box was opened the next day. It contained contracts, recordings, and a folder of videos filmed inside the apartment. Alex had installed a hidden camera in the office to record Elena while she signed documents. He wasn't watching out of jealousy. He was capturing footage of her hand, her habits, and exactly how she placed her signature. In some clips, he distracted her with questions while quietly swapping pages in the stack in front of her. Technicians identified the exact moment she signed the limited guarantee for the Boston project. Afterward, off camera, someone had added the extra pages that later turned up in the altered version. They also found an audio clip of Alex telling an advisor that if Elena ever questioned the power of attorney, they could paint her as confused because of her migraine medication. Lucy stopped the recording before it finished. Elena didn't need to hear any more. That footage erased the last possible interpretation of his actions as simple financial desperation. He had studied her vulnerabilities and turned them into a defense in advance. With that evidence, the court authorized the formal deposit of the ring and ordered its mechanism examined during the upcoming shareholder meeting, since the piece's history was now directly tied to the credibility of several corporate documents. The meeting would take place in the very same winter garden where Elena had first been accused. Beatrice chose the location hoping to control its symbolism, but Lucy agreed to it precisely because the room was full of security cameras and witnesses from that very first night. Board members, bank representatives, the insurance company, a notary, Gabriel Camille, and both sides' attorneys were all called in. Alex tried to keep the press out, but it was already too late. Several outlets knew the meeting was happening. Before walking in, Elena stopped at the same door where security guards had once tried to remove her. She felt no desire for revenge, only a painful kind of clarity. That room had been built to elevate the Whitmores. Now it would also be the place where her version of events stopped being the only possible interpretation. Part 18. The Truth Told in Front of Everyone. Camille arrived without any jewelry, accompanied by her attorney. She avoided looking at Alex, who stood beside Beatrice speaking quietly with two board members still loyal to him. The ring sat inside a clear case on the center table. Gabriel inspected the seals, confirmed nothing had been tampered with, and asked that every step be recorded on video. Alex objected that a jeweler emotionally tied to Claire couldn't act as an independent expert. The insurance company then introduced an outside gemologist who had already reviewed the paperwork and would oversee the process. That precaution ended the objection. Elena sat across from her husband and said nothing. He tried to hold her gaze but ended up leaning toward his attorney instead. The interim board chair opened the session by reminding everyone they weren't there to settle a divorce. They were there to determine whether the CEO had used someone else's property, falsified documents, and misused company resources. That distinction stripped Alex of his favorite argument. He could no longer reduce all of this to the jealousy of a scorned wife. Gabriel lifted the ring from its case and placed it under a magnified camera. He pointed out the engraved leaves, the tilted edge, and two nearly invisible points beneath the setting. When he pressed both with a small tool, the base clicked open. On the screen behind him, the initials CM appeared, along with Elena's exact date of birth. A murmur moved through the room. The gemologist confirmed the inscription was part of the original design and could not have been added recently without leaving visible marks. Gabriel presented the wax mold, the manufacturing photographs, and Claire's notarized letter. Then the certificate of purchase for the emerald and the transfer from Elena's inheritance account. Every document predated the marriage. The chair turned to Beatrice and asked if she recognized this piece as Whitmore family property. She hesitated. Finally, she admitted no such family record existed. The supposed heirloom had just publicly lost the very name Alex had tried to hide it behind. Alex stood and insisted Elena had given him the ring as a gift during their marriage. Lucy asked to play the workshop call. The room listened as he acknowledged on tape that the ring was registered under his wife's name, asked about removing the inscription, and asked about a future sale. His own attorney closed his eyes when it ended. Then came the recording of Alex coaching Camille to present the piece as an heirloom from his grandmother. Camille confirmed she had followed his instructions, though she admitted she'd chosen on her own to provoke Elena at the party. Her statement didn't make her innocent, but it destroyed any chance Alex had of claiming he never knew the lie existed. He tried to interrupt her, accusing her of getting revenge because their relationship had ended. Camille said the relationship ended the moment she realized he planned to sell the ring after using her to humiliate its rightful owner. For the first time, the two women he had pitted against each other were telling different stories that on one essential point lined up perfectly. He had lied to both of them to stay in control. Lucy opened the recoverable folder and projected every page. The watch, the paintings, the earrings, the bracelet, the lake house. Jack Lawrence testified by video call that Alex had used a replica as collateral while hiding the real watch in his own safe deposit box. Mark Carden confirmed he'd received the paintings as compensation for delaying a corporate claim. Stephen turned over the emails where Beatrice ordered a false narrative built around Elena's mental health. Beatrice protested that she was only trying to protect the company from scandal, but the board chair pointed out that using falsified medical claims was not by any definition a legitimate communication strategy. The matriarch went quiet. The same woman who had backed Elena's removal from that very room now had to sit and listen as her own instructions became part of the official record. The Winter Garden had stopped feeling like Whitmore territory. It had become a place where every symbol of authority in that family was being examined as a possible tool of abuse. Part 19. The Verdict. Elena spoke for the first time when the chair asked what she was requesting. She didn't ask for Alex's immediate arrest. She didn't demand Beatrice be thrown out of the mansion. She listed 4 conditions. Court-ordered deposit of every recovered asset, a full external audit, immediate suspension of any executive authority held by Alex, and a clean separation between the company's survival and her personal guarantee. She explained she wouldn't pull her support in a way that put employees at risk, but she also wouldn't remain under the control of people who had used that support to deceive her. Alex stood again and accused her of trying to take over the company. Elena said she had never wanted to run it, and that was precisely why she was demanding independent oversight. Her composure disarmed the accusation. She wasn't fighting for his throne. She was trying to stop the company from operating as an extension of his secrets. Several board members who had been on the fence began backing the suspension. The bank announced it would freeze all operations tied to Elena's guarantee until the audit concluded a decision that immediately blocked several payments, sales, and financing deals Alex had lined up. He understood in that moment that his power could disappear within hours. During a break, he approached Elena and asked to speak privately. Lucy tried to stop him, but Elena agreed to stay just a few feet from everyone else. Alex lowered his voice and said all of it had started as an attempt to save his father's business. He claimed Camille meant nothing, that the scene at the gala had spiraled out of his control. Elena reminded him that he had rehearsed her signature installed, a hidden camera prepared, a fake diagnosis, and asked how to erase her mother's name from a piece of jewelry. None of that had ever been out of his control. He reached toward her, then stopped himself before touching her. For the first time, he didn't look like a powerful heir. He looked like a man with no story left that could justify a single choice he'd made. When the session resumed, a forensic technician presented footage of Alex swapping pages on the document Elena had signed. He also showed records from an offshore account, along with instructions to transfer part of the proceeds from the emerald's planned sale. One of the longest-serving board members stood and asked how much of the company was even real. The question hung over Beatrice, Alex, and their attorneys. The audit had confirmed real buildings, real employees, real projects. It had also confirmed hidden debts, duplicated collateral, and operations quietly propped up by Elena's own inheritance. The chair called for an immediate vote to suspend Alex. Only 2 members voted against it. Beatrice lost her right to serve as interim chair while her own involvement was investigated. The resolution was read aloud. Alex tried to leave the room, but 2 agents from the Financial Crimes Unit were waiting near the exit with an order to seize his devices and formally summon him for questioning. No one raised a hand or a voice. His fall happened with the same cold, procedural stillness he had once used to try to erase Elena. Before the ring was taken away for its formal deposit, Gabriel asked if Elena wanted to hold it. She shook her head. Camille watched her from across the table and seemed to understand that refusal had nothing to do with indifference. Elena didn't need to wear it to prove she'd won. She asked that it stay sealed until every missing piece had been located, and until they knew whether the setting itself had been damaged. Then she handed Lucy one more list. Alex looked at her stunned when she said the emerald wasn't the only thing he had given away, sold, or used without permission. That sentence said, without raising her voice, finished changing the entire mood of the room. The board understood that everything they'd just seen might only be part of the story. Beatrice closed her eyes. Camille lowered her bare hand. Gabriel returned the ring to its case, and the sound of the seal closing seemed to mark the end of a version of that family that had ruled for far too long. When the session ended, reporters crowded the entrance. This time, no one asked Elena if she was jealous. They wanted to know if she'd withdraw her guarantee, if she'd take control of the company, if she planned to press charges against Beatrice. Elena stopped in front of the cameras and gave a short statement. She said the facts would be determined by the courts, that she would protect her own property, and that she supported a path forward that preserved people's jobs without protecting illegal conduct. She didn't mention Camille. She didn't describe what she'd been through. She refused to turn her own pain into a spectacle, even after others had already tried to use it against her. She walked back into the nearly empty room. On the table sat two objects, a copy of the file on Claire's light and the wedding ring still on her hand. Elena looked at it for a few seconds, slid it off slowly, and set it down beside the folder. It wasn't part of any court order. It didn't need to be. Beatrice appeared behind her and looked at the wedding ring sitting on the table. She asked if Elena was really willing to let go of everything they had built. Elena answered that she hadn't built a system out of forged documents and stolen memories. She had given trust money and years of her life, and Alex had turned every one of them into a tool of control. Beatrice started to say the family could recover, but the sentence lost its footing before she finished it. Elena picked up the folder and walked toward the exit. At the door, she turned back one last time and told her mother-in-law that a company could be restructured, a debt could be renegotiated, and a house could be restored, but no one could force another person to call a place family when that place had used her own identity as collateral. Then she walked out of the mansion into the morning light. Behind her, the winter garden kept glittering, but it no longer looked like a showcase of power. It looked like the empty set of a lie that had just run out of an audience. Part 20. Claire House. The weeks after that meeting turned Elena's life into a steady rhythm of statements, meetings, and calls that started before sunrise. Alex was removed from every executive role and formally charged with misappropriation, document fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and improper use of collateral. Beatrice also came under investigation for ordering a false medical narrative and attempting to influence the public handling of the case. The press turned the scandal into a symbol of a powerful family's collapse, but Elena avoided interviews. She didn't want the story reduced to a humiliated wife getting even with her husband. Whenever anyone asked how she was feeling, she said she was still discovering how many parts of her life had been used without her consent. The courts could return documents and objects. Rebuilding trust in her own memories would take far longer. The board appointed an independent administrator to run Whitmore Realty through the audit. Her name was Teresa Montgomery, with decades of experience in corporate turnarounds, and no family ties to the Whitmores whatsoever. Her first move was separating the former executive's personal accounts from company operations. Then she brought Elena in and laid out two paths. In the first, Elena withdrew her guarantee immediately, and the bank moved to collect on several debts, putting hundreds of jobs at risk. In the second, she maintained partial backing for 6 months while the company sold off underperforming assets and renegotiated its obligations under court supervision. Elena chose the second path, with strict conditions. Alex would have no access to any entity in the company. Beatrice would have no role in management. Every contract would go through independent auditors. She wasn't doing it for the Whitmore name. She was doing it for the employees who had never taken part in the family's lies. The decision drew criticism from unexpected places. Some people said she was too soft, that she should have let the company collapse to punish the people who'd humiliated her. Others said maintaining the guarantee proved she still wanted control of the business. She realized eventually that no matter what she did, someone would always twist it into whatever story suited them. So she stopped responding. She visited several job sites, talked to employees, and found that many had spent months worried about delayed paychecks and unexplained changes. No one had told them the real size of the company's debt. One site supervisor told her Alex only ever showed up to take photos and promise grand openings that were never actually happening. Elena came home with a clear conviction. Protecting people's jobs did not mean protecting the family that owned the company. The business could only survive if it stopped functioning as an extension of one man's pride, a man who confused leadership with ownership. Camille formally returned the earrings, the bracelet, and the brooch she still had, along with complete conversations, receipts, and photographs of every gift she'd received. Her cooperation reduced but did not erase the responsibility she faced for the forged form. During her deposition, she admitted she had traced Elena's signature after receiving instructions from Alex. She admitted she knew the real owner hadn't given permission but chose to believe the divorce would soon make the ring hers to keep one way or another. The prosecutor asked why she'd worn the ring to the gala at all. Camille said she wanted to prove in front of everyone that she had won. Saying that word out loud, she understood the cruelty of her own logic. It had never only been about being with Alex. She had needed Elena defeated publicly. Leaving the courthouse, reporters were waiting. For once, she didn't reach for a clever line. She said being deceived didn't erase the harm she had chosen to cause, and she walked away without defending her image. Elena's father's watch came back after Jack Lawrence agreed to hand over the complete loan paperwork. The investigation confirmed Alex had used a low-quality copy as collateral, while keeping the original for a separate transaction. The two paintings returned from Mark Carden's home, carefully packaged along with a written statement. The journalist who'd received the bracelet returned it through an attorney and admitted she'd killed a story in exchange for privileged information. Every object came back carrying its own small history of complicity, silence, or convenience. Elena received them at Gabriel's workshop, where each piece was examined before returning to her hands. When she opened the watch case, she didn't think of Alex. She thought of her father teaching her to wind it on Sunday mornings. The object had passed through contracts, lies, and a bank vault, but the memory attached to it hadn't moved an inch. The emerald ring needed only minor restoration. Gabriel found uneven pressure in the setting from Camille's attempt to have it resized, but the inscription remained untouched. On the day the court authorized its return, Elena went to the workshop alone. Gabriel set Claire's light on a gray cloth and handed her a magnifying glass. Her mother's initials appeared beneath the base, just as sharp as they'd been 9 years earlier. Elena held the ring for a long moment. She didn't put it on. Instead, she asked Gabriel to build a glass case for it to display beside Claire's original sketch. He looked surprised. Elena explained that locking it back in a safe would just turn it into an object ruled by fear. She wanted to see it for what it had always been, a piece born out of a mother's love, not a symbol of ownership inside a marriage, and not proof of victory over another woman. Part 21. What remained? The lake house was protected by a permanent court order voiding any attempt to mortgage it under the forged authorization. Elena began visiting every weekend. At first, she considered restoring it as a place to live away from the city, but the quiet in those rooms kept bringing back something her mother used to say while she worked. A creation only stays alive if someone keeps learning from it. Elena decided to turn the house into a foundation training women with limited resources in jewelry design craftsmanship and small business management. Gabriel agreed to lead the first workshop program, and Teresa arranged for several companies to donate materials without tying the project to the Whitmore name in any way. She named the place Claire House. She didn't put her own name on the building. In the entryway, she placed the ring inside a display case next to the letter where her mother had asked that no one ever turn her daughter's memory into currency. Beatrice took almost 2 months to reach out again. This tea came without lawyers' offers or numbers. She showed up at Claire House while workers were repairing the roof and asked to talk without conditions. Elena received her in the old dining room, still covered in protective sheeting. Beatrice admitted she had known Alex was taking things, even if she never imagined the full scale of the fraud. She'd chosen to believe it would all be returned eventually because facing the truth meant admitting the son she'd spent decades preparing to inherit the company had failed. She also admitted she had looked down on Elena's quiet nature, reading it as dependence when it had really been a kind of respect toward a family that had never offered her the same in return. Beatrice apologized. Elena didn't answer with a hug. She told her that an apology didn't require immediate forgiveness, and the damage didn't disappear just because the person responsible had lost her power. Beatrice accepted that without arguing. Days later, Beatrice testified before the court and confirmed that Alex had told her he was temporarily using some of Elena's assets. She also admitted she'd approved the plan to question Elena's mental health publicly, though she insisted it had never actually been published. Her testimony proved the humiliation at the gala had not been spontaneous. In exchange, her attorneys requested reduced liability for her cooperation. The woman who had spent years controlling every version of the family story now had to describe in open court exactly how she had helped build a lie. She lost her honorary role at the company and stepped back from representing it entirely. Some relatives cut her off. Others accused her of sacrificing Alex to save herself. Beatrice didn't respond. For the first time in her life, she was living without a title powerful enough to shield her from her own decisions. Elena watched that unraveling from a distance. She felt no satisfaction but no guilt either. The consequences weren't a revenge she had invented. They were simply the natural result of choices made again and again. Alex remained free on bail while the case moved forward. His passport was surrendered, his personal accounts frozen, and the apartment placed under inventory. For months he wrote letters to Elena. Some talked about regret, others blamed the pressure of running the company. Some tried to bring back memories of their early happy years. Lucy advised her not to respond, but Elena read one of them in full. Alex wrote that he had never wanted to lose her, and that Camille had been a distraction born out of his own fear of failure. He said he'd taken the assets, believing he could return them before she ever found out. Elena set the letter down without much feeling. She already knew that argument. He kept describing the damage according to his own intentions, never according to the choices he had actually made. He never mentioned the staged humiliation, the rehearsed signature, or the fake diagnosis. He kept trying to present himself as a desperate man who had simply loved badly, instead of accepting that he had turned the people closest to him into resources to be managed. Part 22. Signing. The only meeting between them took place in Lucy's office weeks before the divorce was finalized. Alex arrived, thinner, missing the confidence that used to fill every room he walked into. He saw her and tried to smile, but Elena kept her distance. He asked for 5 minutes alone. Lucy refused, and Elena didn't think it was necessary either. Alex said he was ready to return everything, give up any claim, and publicly acknowledge the ring belonged to her. In exchange, he wanted Elena to request a lighter sentence and state that she had never feared for her safety. She told him she'd never claimed the opposite. The issue was never inventing some physical fear that never existed. It was recognizing a different kind of violence, one built out of manipulation, isolation, and theft. Alex insisted he still loved her. Elena asked exactly when he'd felt that love, while copying her signature, while handing Claire's earrings to another woman, while ordering security to walk her out of the gala. He had no answer. Eventually, he said everything had simply grown too big, that at the start he'd only meant to cover a debt. Elena corrected him calmly. A debt might explain the first appraisal. It didn't explain the gifts to Camille, the lies to Beatrice, the paintings handed to businessmen, or the plan to discredit her publicly. Every step had required a fresh decision. He'd had countless chances to stop, to confess, to ask for help. Instead, he chose to build a version of events where Elena was fragile, unstable, and ungrateful. Alex looked down and asked if she'd ever be able to forgive him. She said forgiveness wasn't a contract he could negotiate down for a lighter sentence. Maybe someday the memory would stop hurting. that still wouldn't mean giving him a place back in her life. She signed the divorce agreement, pulled her wedding band out of a small bag, and left it on the table. This time, there were no guests, no cameras, just a door she could finally close for good. The settlement recognized every inherited asset as Elena's exclusive property and established compensation for the items that were never fully recovered. She put that money into Clare House not to turn her pain into some tidy redemptive story, but because she refused to let cash quietly replace what had actually been lost. Under Teresa's leadership, Whitmore Realty sold 2 luxury properties, canceled projects that were never going to work, and renegotiated its debts. Elena's guarantee was gradually reduced until it disappeared entirely after 6 months. The core staff kept their jobs even as the family lost the absolute control it had held for generations. The board offered Elena a permanent seat in recognition of her role in the turnaround. She turned it down and agreed only to a 1-year term as an outside advisor. She had no interest in replacing Beatrice or becoming the next powerful figure at the center of a structure that needed more than anything to stop depending on any one person at all. Camille left the city after resolving her case. Before she left, she sent Elena a short letter. She wasn't asking for friendship or immediate forgiveness. She admitted she had used someone else's pain to feel superior, and that the ring had shown her something she hadn't wanted to see. She hadn't been chosen out of love. She'd been placed in a useful role inside someone else's lie. Elena didn't reply, but she kept the letter in her file. She didn't want to forget that Camille had actively taken part in her humiliation, even as she understood that pinning it all on the other woman would have let Alex hide behind her. The real center of this story had never been a rivalry between 2 women. It was a man who pitted 2 people against each other in order to control them both, and a family that protected its own version of events for exactly as long as it stayed profitable to do so. Understanding that structure helped Elena finally let go of the question of why Camille had been enough. It had never been about being enough. It had only ever been about power. Part 23. Clare House opens. Clare House opened to the public that spring. 12 women made up the first class. A single mother working night shifts, a young woman who dropped out of school, 2 immigrant women building new lives, a widow, and several staff members looking for financial independence. Gabriel taught traditional jewelry techniques in the mornings. Elena taught design and small business management in the afternoons. In the entryway, the glass case holding the emerald drew every eye that passed it. Underneath, there was no description of its market value, just a line taken from Claire's original sketch. Nothing beautiful ever needs to humiliate another woman to shine. Elena chose those words because they summed up exactly what the ring had ended up revealing. Camille believed wearing it made her superior. Alex believed owning it let him buy loyalty. Beatrice believed she could rewrite her family's story to protect its name. None of them ever understood that the ring's real beauty was bound to a memory none of them could ever actually own. During the opening, one of the students asked Elena why she never wore the ring for special occasions. She opened the case and held the jewel up to the light. She explained that for years she'd believed protecting a memory meant hiding it, guarding it, living in fear of losing it. Eventually, she understood that no safe on earth could protect something a person wasn't willing to stand up for out loud. The ring was still hers. She just no longer needed to wear it to prove it. Belonging to someone was never the same thing as owning them. Claire's story lived on in the design in the restored house and in every woman learning to build something of her own inside it. Elena returned the ring to its case and closed the small glass door. Across the room, Gabriel watched her, his eyes wet. He didn't say anything. They both knew Claire would have understood that decision better than anyone. Part 24. What was left behind? Months later, the court issued its first rulings. Alex was found responsible for multiple counts of forgery and asset misappropriation, and barred from managing companies for a set number of years. The remaining financial charges would continue to be reviewed separately. Beatrice received a lesser sentence in recognition of her later cooperation, though she permanently lost any role within the company. The story led the news for a few days, then quietly disappeared beneath other headlines. For Elena, that silence felt like a release. The legal process couldn't return the years of marriage or the trust she'd once handed over so freely, but it established something essential. What happened to her had never been a private argument or some sentimental misunderstanding. It had been real, documented, and deliberate harm. She no longer needed society to believe her tears. The truth now lived permanently in case files, recordings, matched signatures, and recovered objects. For the first time, Elena could stop trying to prove it and start living outside of it. One fall afternoon, Beatrice visited Clare House again. She carried a small box she'd found among old belongings at the mansion. Inside was a photograph of Elena and Claire taken at a jewelry exhibition long before the marriage. Beatrice admitted she'd seen it once at a family dinner and kept it almost without thinking, mixed in among other keepsakes. Elena studied the photograph. Her mother was smiling, holding the emerald sketch. Beatrice asked if she could contribute financially to the foundation. Elena agreed on the condition that it stay an anonymous donation. No plaque, no special recognition. The former matriarch nodded. Before leaving, she said she had spent her entire life believing that protecting a family meant hiding its cracks from everyone else. Elena told her that sometimes the only way to actually save something is to let the light in through them. They didn't hug, but that conversation was more honest than every year that had come before it. Closing up the house that evening, Elena walked through the restored rooms and listened to the echo of the students' voices still lingering in the air. She stopped in front of the display case. The emerald caught the warm hallway light, but it no longer brought back Camille's hand or Alex's voice accusing her of theft. She saw her mother's fingers sketching those leaves, she saw Gabriel's patience, and she saw the woman she herself had become. Alex had managed to take objects, alter documents, and convince a great many people for a while. What he was never able to steal was the meaning Elena chose to keep. The truth had taken so long to surface because it had been buried under prestige, fear, and money. But every lie leaves a mark. In the end, it wasn't the value of the stone that brought down the Whitmores' hold on power. It was the arrogance of believing that a woman's memory, her dignity, and her identity could be transferred without ever asking for her consent. Elena turned off the lights and locked the door of Clare House. Outside, the trees in the garden were beginning to lose their leaves, but new buds were already forming beneath the bark. Walking to her car, she thought about how healing didn't mean going back to who she used to be. The woman who had walked into that gala, still waiting for an explanation from her husband, was gone. The woman walking out of her mother's house that evening no longer needed one. She had learned that love without respect eventually turns into ownership. That power, held up by silence, ends up devouring the very people it was meant to protect, and that no fortune can ever replace broken trust. She had also learned that dignity was never about holding on to every object from the past. It was about refusing to let anyone else write your story for you. Behind the glass, the emerald sat quiet and bright, not as a trophy of victory, but as proof that the truth can be stolen for a while, but it never truly belongs to the thief.